All right, thanks, Jenny. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes, everything looks great.
All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Amanda Wekesser. I'm going to be talking about some blowing dust events we had in the High Plains area on December 2nd of 2022. I'll talk a little bit about environmental conditions that are favorable for dust storms and blowing dust events. We'll take a look at a dust storm that impacted pretty much the entirety of the Goodland CWA from December 2nd. We'll also take a look at a blowing dust event, not quite as impactful, that occurred in the Hastings area on that same day that involved a burn scar. So just a little bit of background about blowing dust events. The Goodland office, Dave Thiede, Jeremy Martin, and myself started researching dust in 2019. We wanted to basically learn more about what causes dust storms going on. Dust is a leading cause of accidents in the Goodland CWA. And so we really wanted to highlight, are there certain parameters that we can look at to potentially give us a heads up that dust is going to be occurring on a given day, so that not only can we protect people in our area, but also let our emergency responders know that, hey, this may be an impactful day that you want to keep an eye out for. Our preliminary findings do make it possible to where we can predict blowing dust events and the area within a few hours to days in advance. Our original study looked at several different parameters, including relative humidity, precipitation, snow cover, wind speed, lapse rates, temperatures, visibility. We're currently looking at soil moisture to see if we can find any information on that. So this is an ongoing research project right now. We did actually find that there are some environmental conditions that are favorable for dust storms. And this is based on over 1,600 observations that we analyzed from 6 ASOS sites across the Goodland and Boulder CWAs. We found that strong winds at the surface and aloft, in addition to sort of an unstable environment, are more favorable for dust storms. But we also found that we need a dust source for getting the dust to get going. Some of our initial results we found with our first test of our findings was on January 15th of 2021. We successfully forecasted 3 to 4 days in advance a dust storm situation impacting northeastern Colorado and northwestern Kansas, where we had warnings out for a good majority of the day. Visibility reductions were 1/4 mile or less. December 15th was another high profile case that our results pretty much verified several days in advance that we were going to have potentially dust issues across the entirety of Goodland CWA. December 15th, for those who remember, was a dust and fire event for the Goodland area. There were QLCS tornadoes and dust issues in Nebraska and several other states on this event. April 4th, 2023, we had blowing dust coming up from New Mexico and Western Texas that actually did reach the Hastings CWA. Hastings typically doesn't get a lot of blowing dust and the wall of dirt type situations that portions of the desert Southwest and the Goodland area receive. And then the December 2nd case study was also another day where our research pretty much was verified based on the results of what happened. Another factor that we need to consider when we're doing dust type situations, our environmental conditions may be favorable for blowing dust, but we also need some sort of a source region. If we don't have a source region, we're probably not going to get a big, huge situation with dust. Source regions, just for background, for the Goodland area include northeastern Colorado, primarily with a northwest wind, and also open fields, typically with nothing in the ground. So late fall, during the winter and early spring are the primary seasons for dust, as farmers are getting in the fields, preparing fields for spring planting, winter wheat. Source regions for Hastings, again, not quite as common on the blowing dust and the major impacts. We'll occasionally get dust coming from Colorado. That typically occurs as dust is moving into the Goodland area and then dispersing and spreading out into the Hastings area. Open fields during the springtime as farmers are getting ready to plow and getting into their fields. And then also with burn scars, we found some issues during the 2022 season, particularly when vegetation has not had a chance to redevelop or regrow. So getting into the December 2nd, 2022 case study, this is a graphic that Goodland put out highlighting the possibility for dust and a cold front moving through the area. We had a strong front move through, strong winds, and blowing dust were reported. There were also some fire conditions concerns in the southern part of the area. The environmental conditions, based on the local research that Dave, Jeremy, and I did show the possibility for blowing dust across most of Goodland's area and a small portion of the southwestern portion of Hastings area as well. Here is a look at what the HRRR was showing for the 2 to 2.5 kilometer lapse rates at 21Z. Why 21Z is important is I have an image that I'll show you a little bit later highlighting how our parameters actually fell in line with the dust. Here's the 0 to 2 kilometer lapse rate at 21Z. Our parameter is in the red line there. And this is a time lapse of the actual event as it unfolded. This is the RGB dust channel. The dark pink are the higher concentrations of dust. Anywhere where there is pink, there is dust going on. You can see it moving through the Goodland area here with the cold front. And we're going to go ahead and break this down a little bit on what actually happened. So at 1746 Zulu, we had a cold front located near Fort Morgan Airport over in northeastern Colorado. We have a very thin, faint area of pink here, possibly a dust plume north of the airport. We do have a couple of other areas of dust highlighted by the yellow arrows. One is down heading into Kit Carson. The other one is in the Pueblo and Dodge City areas. Now we fast forward to 1806 Zulu. The cold front is continuing to advance, coming toward the Akron area. And we do see that that pink line up north of Fort Morgan is actually a dust plume. The dust is getting a little bit, you can see it a little better, it's a little darker pink. We're also starting to see a little bit of a higher concentration of dust indicated by a little bit darker pink coming into Washington County and Adams County. Now we fast forward to 1831Z, and we're starting to see more plumes of dust develop, as indicated by the yellow arrows here. We have several plumes down here, up toward Fort Morgan still, and as this dust is getting going, we're getting dust particles hitting the ground, bouncing up, hitting the ground, bouncing up, displacing more dust in a process that is called saltation. Now, as this process continues, and we have this dust being carried by the wind, this dust starts to get suspended, and it moves with the front, getting higher concentrations along the front. And as we get going, this is what we start seeing with a wall of dirt type of situation. So we fast forward another hour to 1931. You can definitely see the concentrations of dust increasing along the cold front and behind it toward Flagler, Stratton, and Idalia. Still seeing quite a few plumes feeding in the dust to this growing concern area. And we fast forward another hour to 2041, and the dust continues to impact the area, stretching as far back as Canarado and Goodland, down to Sharon Springs, Kit Carson, and up into the Colby area. This is where the front is, Kit Carson to Sharon Springs and on up to Colby. We do, however, see some lesser impacts from blowing dust up toward the McCook and Oberlin areas. There is faint pink in those areas, and that indicates that the concentrations of dust are not as great. I believe that this is because the dust source regions, as we could see with all those plumes, were coming from northeastern Colorado, And as we're getting further and further away, we're not getting the feeder sources into the McCook and Oberlin areas. We're getting the dust spreading out and dispersing a little bit, causing still some impacts potentially with dust, but not the highly concentrated stuff that we're seeing further south into Goodlands area. So as a reminder, were our lapse rates. This was the 2 to 2.5 kilometer lapse rate. Here was the 0 to 2 kilometer lapse rate, pretty much about co-located with where the front and the concentration of dust was the greatest. This is an image taken from a Kansas DOT camera east of Oakley on Interstate 70. Oakley's highlighted by the yellow star on the satellite map. Dust can cause a lot of visibility issues, which is why we have a lot of problems with potential for accidents and why we remind people to pull aside off the road, put your vehicle in park, put on the parking brake, turn off your lights, and fasten your seatbelt. We want to make sure that people are not being seen if they're on the side of the road and stationary. In these low visibility situations, if you're driving and you are going faster than the person in front of you, but you can't see that person, there's concern that you're going to have an accident. Well, if somebody is on the side of the road with their lights on, somebody might think that the person on the side of the road is potentially driving, think that that's the road, and they may move over and not realize the person is stationary. So we remind people in these low visibility situations to pull aside, turn off your lights, and try and be as safe as you can. In this image, we can actually see in the top left part of the screen barely a vehicle moving down the interstate. And we can also faintly see a bridge. This is before the worst of the dust actually moved into the Oakley area. Again, on satellite, we can see a little bit of faint pink in the McCook, Oberlin, and Cambridge areas. Toward the Cambridge area and Wilsonville area, we see that faint pink, and we did actually get a little bit of dust in the top right corner of this image from the Nebraska DOT cameras. Again, very faint dust because we're not getting that source region. And we also have some corn stalks and a cornfield here that is also potentially helping to disrupt some of the blowing dust potential. So our second case study was a burn scar that occurred. We had a fire that broke out on October 23rd of 2022. It burned over 10,000 acres of land. We really didn't have a whole lot of regrowth in the month and a half leading up to the December 2nd event. This is an image of the burn scar that we had in that area. Our winds for the Hastings area were from the north to northwest that day. And so all of the wind coming in pretty much had the entirety of the burn scar to pick up dust, get the dust moving, and create a small dust plume. We didn't have a lot of moisture heading into this event, and environmental conditions were okay for the possibility of blowing dust. That factored in with the dust source region. We actually did have some faint traces of blowing dust show up on satellite. Here's that burn scar put onto the map. There is a very thin, faint area of blowing dust west of Superior, down to the east of Mankato, and dispersing out. You can still see faint traces of it to the northeast of Beloit. We didn't actually receive any reports of blowing dust, so we don't know if this was lofted only or if it actually made it to the surface. However, we did have a Viero camera show blowing dust in the distance, which you can kind of see there pointed out by the yellow arrows. So here's one more look at the blowing dust coming off of the burn scar. The burn scar is up here toward Guide Rock and Nelson, and the blowing dust is coming down into north central Kansas. With that, that is all I have. If you have any questions, I'll feel free to answer them, and I'll turn things back over to Jenny.
All right, thanks so much, Amanda. Do we have any questions? And again, if you do have a question, you can raise your hand or type it in the question box and I'll read it for you. All right. Well, I am not seeing anything right now, Amanda. If you do think of a question, please feel free to reach out to her. This is awesome research, and I think it's definitely very applicable for all of our High Plains offices. So I'd encourage you to reach out and follow up with this research. All right. Thanks everyone for joining today. That is all we have for the guest speaker series. So I will go ahead and end our recording, and this should be available within a couple of days if there's anyone else you want to refer to the recordings afterwards. So thanks again for joining, and we will see you next week.